Hello, everyone. My name is Matt Barton, and I'm the Urban Conservation Specialist with St. Louis Audubon Society. And thanks for taking some time tonight to join us for the BirdSafe St. Louis training session for fall 2025. On tonight's call, we'll go over a few different topics, including risks facing migratory birds, information about the BirdSafe St. Louis project and our past findings, our survey protocol and logging observation in our iNaturalist projects, and then we'll discuss the next steps as we prepare for the beginning of the fall surveys. So I like to start the presentation showing a picture of City Garden here in downtown St. Louis. And for those of you who are familiar with downtown St. Louis, that's a nice kind of green space in City Garden just west of Keener Plaza, right along Market Street. And when you look at this picture, you can probably see why it might be an attractive place for birds. You've got good habitat over there. There's plenty of food and water resources in this little park. And there's lots of shelter as well. So it would be a good place to stop over and get some rest if you were a migrating bird. But when you look at this image a little more closely, you might start to pick out some odd features. You might kind of see this little orb here in the sky and a few others. And then also there's some little dots down here. And the reason is that this isn't a picture of City Garden. It's actually a picture of a reflection of City Garden. So I like to show this picture because I think it kind of goes to demonstrate some of the challenges that birds are facing when they're interacting with our urban environments. We are intelligent human beings, and we have the luxury of sitting and looking at this picture on the left, but it can still be difficult to tell that that's, actually just a reflection in a window. And bird populations are in crisis, unfortunately. The Cornell Lab of Ornithology published a study in Science in 2020 that the United States and Canada have lost about 30% of our bird population since 1970. And this chart on the left, you can kind of see some of these broader classes of birds and how their populations are trending over time, which you can see most of these groups are losing and trending in the wrong direction. And there's a lot of different reasons for why we're seeing these populations decline, including habitat loss. So think about developments, farmland being turned into, subdivisions, forests being clear cut. There's also changing climate conditions. So as our climate changes, that's also going to affect bird populations just for, different parts of their life cycles. And climate change also plays into habitat loss. So think about things like rising sea levels. There's cat predation, which is a really large issue for birds. That not only includes feral cats, but also pet cats that people allow to wander freely, which is a really big issue for not only birds, but a lot of different animals. And then finally, there's the issue of building collisions, which is what we're going to focus on this evening. So migration is a part of the biology of birds that can put them at risk. So every year, around 3 to 5 billion birds migrate through the United States and Canada during spring and fall. 70% of North American bird species are migratory, and of those migratory birds, 80% migrate at night. And you might think to yourself, what would be the benefit of a bird migrating at night? And there's actually a few reasons. One is that there's going to be cooler temperatures at night, which just, is just generally less stress on the birds as they're migrating through. There's going to be fewer predators. So if you think about those kind of diurnal predators like hawks and other birds of prey, a lot of them are, asleep. And importantly, birds also use celestial cues like the stars and moon to assist them as they navigate on their migratory journeys. And here we have an image showing the four major migratory pathways in the United States. So we have the Pacific, the Central, the Mississippi, and the Atlantic. And here in St. Louis, we're right there in the middle of the Mississippi Flyway, as denoted by that red star. And the Mississippi Flyway is a particularly important flyway for birds. About 60% of North American songbird species use the flyway, 40% of North American waterfowl species, and that's representing over 325 bird species that are using this flyway. One of the features of the flyway that makes it so attractive is the river systems that are within the flyway. So think of the Mississippi and the Missouri. Those are helping to provide good resources and habitat for birds while they're on their migratory journeys. So in St. Louis in the spring, birds are generally moving from the south to the north on their way to their breeding grounds. Um, Peak migration is typically in the first couple of weeks in May, but there is some variability with migration each year. But that is why in May in St. Louis, we do observe the Lights Out Heartland campaign and observe Lights Out. In fall, it's a little bit flipped. So in the fall, birds are generally going from north to south, back down to their wintering grounds. It's a more drawn out period of time that migration occurs over. Some species will start migrating in as early as late July, and some are still on their journeys even into November. So for our Lights Out Heartland campaign, we observe that month in September just to kind of split the difference. And St. Louis itself is actually a particularly dangerous city for migrating birds. So the Cornell Lab of Ornithology did a study and they looked at data including light pollution levels, uh, geography, and also radar data. Um, and so, as you can see here in these images, these circles are representing the different radar stations that were used to gain data and track birds as they're migrating. Um, then the color coding here is that those cooler colors are showing just generally less migration activity. And then as it gets to those more yellow and warm shades, that's showing more migratory activity. And based on their study, they determined that St. Louis is the fifth most dangerous city for birds during spring migration and the sixth most dangerous during fall. And bird collisions are a really big challenge for birds. Um, Current estimates are that up to 1 billion birds are killed annually by building collisions in the United States alone. So when you think about, other places in the world as well, you really can start to imagine the scale of the problem. Um, when you kind of look at the data that we as available and start breaking down, where these collisions are occurring, around 56% are happening at low-rise buildings, which are classified as 4 to 11 stories tall. 44% are at residencies, which are classified as 1 to 3 stories. And less than 1% are at high-rise buildings of 12 stories or more, but their birds per building mortality rate is the highest. So even though there aren't proportionally a lot of high-rise buildings out there, they have an outsized impact on, the collisions and bird mortality. And the primary risk factors that cause collisions are light and glass. And so when it comes to light, like we already discussed a little bit earlier, birds are using celestial cues like the stars and the moon to assist them in their navigation. So when there's a lot of light pollution and sky glow, birds can become disoriented, and birds will actually be drawn into areas where there is this light pollution. So then they're being drawn into, our urban areas where there's an increased risk of collision. And then they're also wasting, energy and other resources, um, basically kind of circling around or, in our urban areas when they should be going about their migratory journey. And the sky glow situation can be amplified when there's, storms in the area or bad weather. That low cloud ceiling can really, cause some additional problems with that light pollution and that associated glow. And so all of these birds on the right, these are all birds that I've encountered while out collision monitoring. Just for reference, going clockwise from the top right here, we've got an indigo bunting, we've got a ruby-throated hummingbird. Bottom left is a golden-winged warbler, and up top left we have a yellow-bellied sapsucker. And so, an example of light and the issues that it can cause, that some of you might be familiar with, is the Tribute in Lights Memorial in New York City. So, on September 11th every year, lights are columns of light are shined into the sky in commemoration of the attacks on September 11th. It's a very, pretty memorial, but inadvertently, it causes some issues. So in the picture here on the left, you can see the two columns of light at the memorial, and you can see what almost appears to be like insects flying around in the columns of light. But those actually are not insects, those are birds. And so, unfortunately, as everything occurred, September fall migration is already underway when September rolls around. So after some time, people began to realize the issue with the birds getting trapped in the columns of light, and crews up in that area, volunteers, what they started doing was they would have teams that they would count, and when 1,000 birds were seen to be circling in the light, or they were able to observe an exhausted bird falling to the ground, the lights would be turned off for around 20 minutes, which would give the birds a chance to clear that area, continue along their migratory path, and then the lights would be turned back on. And there's also the issue of glass. And to start, birds don't know what glass is, so they don't see glass as a barrier. And when it comes to windows, it's a bit of a twofold problem. We have the problem of reflectivity, so situations where the glass is reflecting vegetation or maybe the sky. So in that top image here, you can see that there's some trees and other foliage that's reflecting in that window bank. Looks like probably to the right of the photographer. And so if a bird were to see that, they would probably see that and think, well, that's a tree that I could go fly to and, maybe find some food or rest or whatever they're trying to do. But unfortunately, then they fly at it and they have a collision. There's also the issue of transparency with glass. In that situation, the glass is clear, the birds don't realize it's there, and they think they can just fly through. But then again, they have a collision. There's also what we call glass canyons or walkways, like you'll see in this bottom picture on the left. Those are, areas that are connecting buildings, but those can also be particularly dangerous for birds because it's just another kind of small area between two large buildings that a collision could occur. And here are a couple of pictures from downtown Clayton where we monitor. These are the Centene buildings. And you can see here that we've really got a problem with reflections. These buildings are really hyper reflective. They're reflecting the sky and the clouds. They're reflecting off of each other. So this, could really easily be a disorienting area for birds. And you can also see here that on this image, they actually have also a glass canyon connecting these two buildings. So, with all of that information in mind and those wrist birds and um, all the concerns around collisions, that was the impetus for the creation of the BirdSafe St. Louis project. And our goal is to establish long-term community relationships that support bird safe practices and reduce bird fatalities in the St. Louis region. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to collect the data on where, when, and who is colliding with windows so that we can approach property managers with targeted actions and how they could reduce bird mortality. And we also use our data for other purposes as well. All of our data goes to an organization called Global Bird Collision Mapper, which is an international organization that other groups like ours submit their information to so we can get a better idea of where collisions are happening on a global scale. Our program's data has also been used in some larger studies. In the past, National Audubon and KPMG, the analytics firm, did some studies together about collisions, and our data was actually one of two sets, pardon me, three, I believe, sets that was used in that study and analysis. Our data is in iNaturalist project, so that's available to researchers or anyone else who might be interested in, collisions. And importantly, it also allows us to start conversations with property managers and other stakeholders. So historically, we started surveying in downtown St. Louis in the fall of 2020. We've done collisions each spring and fall since then, except for fall 2022. In that time, we've uh, recorded just over 1,500 observations in our project, accounting for over 94 species, or pardon me, accounting for 94 species of bird. And here you can see some of the birds that these are the 10 highest, encounters that we see as far as frequency. Downtown Clayton, we actually started surveying there in the spring of 2024. And you can see that in that time we've recorded 163 observations uh, for accounting for 41 species. And just kind of some more big picture numbers in 2024, our program conducted a total of 102 surveys between the spring and the fall. And in those 102 surveys, we encountered 381 collisions. And on the right here, there's a little bit of a breakdown of those numbers. You can see that roughly 73% of those were encountered in downtown St. Louis, and the remaining 27% were located at the site in downtown Clayton. And for those of you who are familiar with downtown Clayton, here's a breakdown of the buildings where we encountered the most collisions last year. Um, the one where we find the most collisions is One North Brentwood, which is a building that's at the corner of Forsyth and Brentwood, just north of Shaw Park. So, near a green space that birds would like to use while they're on their migratory journeys. Then we have those Centene buildings following up with which were those really reflective buildings we looked at earlier. In downtown St. Louis, Bank of America Plaza is our biggest culprit for collisions, followed by Peabody Plaza. Both of those buildings are right around that green space that we looked at the very beginning of the presentation, City Garden. So again, that proximity to green space. And if you're interested in learning more details about what we encountered last year, I prepared a report with our findings, which you can find on our St. Louis Audubon website, or if you scan the QR code below, you will be taken to it as well. All right. So now that we've gone over a lot of information about, general information about collisions and why they occur, let's dive into our fall 2025 protocol and what we'll actually be doing on our surveys. So this fall, we are going to be surveying again in Clayton and downtown St. Louis. The image below here is our site map for downtown Clayton, and I'll explain a bit how we use these maps as we go into the protocol. Um, but one of the reasons that we wanted to survey in downtown Clayton is because there's an increasing amount of renovations and buildings being constructed in downtown Clayton. So we wanted to see what exactly is going on there since we hadn't historically, surveyed in downtown Clayton. Um, as far as downtown St. Louis, we survey down there because it's a known problem and has been for a while. And then we can use that data to continue to build up our data set from over the years. Um, so in the map here, you'll see that we have buildings that are blue and have names on them. And then around the edges of those blue buildings, we have some dark blue borders. So the blue buildings are indicating the our target buildings that we want to survey around. And those dark blue borders are showing what sides of those buildings are accessible because, not all sides of the buildings that we're looking at are accessible because of, locked courtyards, just, a myriad of reasons. And so here's a little bit of a zoomed in picture showing a couple of the buildings here in Clayton. So again, we're walking around those blue target buildings and those dark blue lines around the perimeters are showing generally where you're able to walk and look for collisions. So when we're out looking around our target buildings, when we find a bird, we want to take photos of it from multiple angles. And the reason that we take photos from multiple angles is to help aid with identification. We want to be able to see the different patterns and colors, and just as much information about the bird as we can. Because sometimes with, certain birds like warblers, it can be a very small difference between the plumage or another feature of the bird that differentiates between one species and another. So with that, the shots that we take are a top-down shot or dorsal, a bottom-up shot or ventral, a side shot, clear view of the head, and then a context shot, which we'll get into on the next slide. And those pictures will be submitted with your observations into the iNaturalist project. So the context shots are, you can see a few here in the image below. When we take our context shots, it's what the purpose is that it's showing where the bird is located along the building. And we place those cones there because sometimes in a larger context shot, with some of these birds like warblers, they're very small, so it's very easy for them to almost, get lost in the shot. So the cone helps for an observer that's looking at the pictures to quickly say, all right, within this wider context shot, this is where the bird is located. And we do provide cones for our surveyors. So if you're in need of one of those, that'll be some information that we collect in the follow-up when we're getting additional details from you for the season. And this is showing some demonstrations of those different shots that we're looking for. So again, we've got the dorsal, which is the top down, a side shot, a headshot, which is just in this, getting a little bit closer to the head, um, the ventral shot, so the bottom up, and then the context shot. So you just from that context shot, and I'm sure some of our returning surveyors can probably recognize that area as well. I can tell you that is at downtown St. Louis, and that's the Wainwright building. So that context shot is helpful, for us to see, where exactly at that site the collision occurred. So a bit about iNaturalist for those of you who aren't familiar. iNaturalist is a crowdsourced species identification system and an organism occurrence recording tool. Their website is there, right there below. Uh, and it really is a great resource and a lot of different organizations use that, and just people, going out and, going on a hike or whatever they might be doing. It's a great resource for recording observations, getting help with identification for what you're seeing, and also to collaborate with others and collect information for a common purpose, like we are in our projects. And it's useful because then the information is easily accessible in one central place. It can easily be exported for analysis and review and to make graphics and things like that. And then we're also using less supplies and it's more eco-friendly. Um, so what you'll need to do for the project is you'll need to download the iNaturalist app to your phone. If you don't have a smartphone, that's okay. That's not a problem. We'll just need to make sure that you're paired up with a survey partner that does have a smartphone. That way, at least one of you is able to make the observations into our projects. Um, if you're using iOS, there's actually two versions of iNaturalist. You will want to choose the one that is iNaturalist Classic. The newer one that they're working on doesn't have access to projects, so that's very important that you get iNaturalist Classic if you're using an iPhone. On the Google Play Store, there's just one iNaturalist app, and it looks like the little thumbnail that I have there below. Um, Once you have that on your phone, you'll either, if you already have an iNaturalist account, you'll need to sign in, or if you don't, you can create a new one, and that's all free. And we'll also then collect your iNaturalist name so that we can add you to our projects. That is important because we not know the people in the public can't get in our project and record observations. You have to be invited to our project to make submissions. So let's just go over the steps here of an example of logging an observation in iNaturalist. And keep in mind that I use a Android phone, so my screen grabs might look slightly different from what you would see in iOS, but it's all going to be very similar. And the protocols for our surveying in downtown St. Louis and downtown Clayton are nearly identical. The first steps of the process are going to be the same regardless of which site you're surveying at. And so let's start with an example here in Clayton. So when you open up the iNaturalist app, what you'll want to do is click Add Observation. That on the Android app, it looks like a green circle with a plus symbol. Once you click that, it'll pull up a few different options. What I do then is choose images. Um, Whenever I first encounter a bird, typically what I do first is I get all of my photos. And remember, we're trying to get the dorsal, the ventral, the side, the headshot, and then also that context shot. So once you click choose image, it'll pull up your camera roll, like in this spot here on the left, and you just select the pictures that you need for that observations, and that'll be lit up here as you can see with the little blue check mark to show and indicate that you've selected those pictures. Um, Once you've done that, you'll click the add button, and that will take you to this screen on the right. And you can see here that those pictures that we chose from the camera reel, now they're showing up here at the top. So the next field down is what did you see? So this is where you would record if you know what species of bird it is. You can go ahead and click that and enter in the species of bird. Um, if you're not sure or you're in doubt, that's no problem. What you'll just want to do is start typing in birds. and that will pull up and should it or birds or aves, and you would select that just as kind of a general, bird. Um, so the next field down is notes. That is a good area for if there's any sort of notes or information that you want to share with me and the project coordinators about that particular observation. You can add notes there. This is also a good place to note incidental finds if you have an incidental find, which we'll get into in the next couple screens. The next field down is the date and time. That should be auto-filled and just already there for you. Next is the location. So your phone will probably automatically pull your location based on the metadata in your photos or the location services on your phone. You can click into there and just take a quick look and see if that looks accurate to where you are. In the event that it's not quite right, you can then drag your screen and put the little crosshairs on where you are. Typically, the location services are pretty good, but it never hurts to check, click into that field and just take a look to see where it says you are. Um, Location visibility, that's going to be on. We want to have that on so that our data can be seen by other people who are using iNaturalist and would like to use our data as well. And the next field down, is it captivated or cultivated? You won't need to worry about that. And then finally, there is add to projects. So when you click on add to projects, it'll take you to a screen like this one right here on the left. And that will show all of the different projects that you're involved with. So once we have your iNaturalist username, we'll add you to the project, and then our two projects will populate. There's the downtown BirdSafeSTL downtown Clayton for Clayton observations, and then there's BirdSafeSTL for downtown St. Louis. So in our Clayton example, we would want to click Clayton, like you see here. And once you do that, it's going to pull up all of the project specific questions that we're looking for. Um, and under each of the questions, there's a brief description that'll kind of give you information for what we're looking for, just in case, you're reading the title and you're not quite sure what it means. Those little subheadings can help you kind of be a reminder of what we're looking for. So once we have all of that, the first field that is in the project is the building name. And so that is a drop-down option that will have all of the different buildings for that specific site listed. This is also a good kind of way to check to be sure you're in the right project. If you don't select the right project, the building won't be in the list. So that's a kind of a good way to tell that, if you're at Bank of America in downtown St. Louis and you are looking through your list and you don't see Bank of America listed in the buildings, you might have accidentally clicked into Clayton instead of downtown St. Louis. But that's no problem. You just go back and select the correct project. So for the building name, how we determine that is we use those maps, like the one at kind of the beginning of the protocol section here. The options in the drop-down box are roughly listed from east to west when you're looking at the map, just to kind of make things a little easier. And in the event that you find a bird at another building that isn't one of our targets, you would select other. And that's what we call an incidental find. So that's where actually, we'll go to the next slide for that. So that's what we call an incidental find. So next field is the site of the building. You can use your map. Google Maps helps with that kind of as well. If you're not super strong on your directions, you can use that Maps app has a compass feature, which is helpful. But you'll, kind of learn little tips and tricks as you're out there to help orient yourself. Um, the next field is that incidental find, like we were talking about. So in the event when we're out surveying, when we're walking between those target buildings that we're surveying, if we find a bird, we'll log that and classify it as an incidental find. Um, Also, in the event that you were like maybe walking by a building that, isn't one of our targets, you can also log that as an incidental find. So if it's one of those circumstances in that drop-down box, you would select yes. And then in the notes section there, like we talked about earlier, that's where you could put some more information, like the name of the building you found it at, um, or an address of that building, any information to help us establish where exactly that bird was found. The next field down is distance from likely strike point. So what we're doing there is we're walking, typically we're not using like a tape measure or anything, but you're just walking off the distance between the likely strike point and where the bird was found. Um, we record that information in feet and inches. Um, if possible, when you're recording those distances, if you can avoid using the quotation marks to indicate inches, that's helpful because for some reason, iNaturalist, when we're exporting the data, it uh, does not like the quotation mark for some reason. So if you accidentally use it, that's no problem. It's not the end of the world. We can still figure out what you're trying to tell us. It's just the data stays a little bit cleaner and it's easier for me when I'm doing the analysis. And when you're looking for the distance from the likely strike point, you want to look around and assess, where it was that that bird hit. Sometimes and that includes, looking up and around you as well, because sometimes there's buildings that have overhangs that, a bird might hit the overhang versus the wall of the building. So in that instance, we would count the distance off from if, the bird hit the overhang, we would mark off the distance from the bird to the overhang versus the bird to the actual wall of the building. And then the final field here is possible predation. That's also a yes or no question. In the event that you find a bird that's um, has clear signs of predation, like it's missing its head, or it's been partially consumed, or maybe you just find a wing, we don't need to log those clear instances of predation. In those cases, I typically will just take the bird and dispose of it. Um, if you're if you find a bird though and you're not exactly certain whether it's a predatory event or a collision, I'd say just go ahead and err on the side of caution, log that into observation into the project, and then you can select yes for that possible predation field. And what that does is that helps give me an extra heads up to say, hey, I need to take a closer look at the pictures for this observation and see if we can determine if this was a predation event or a collision. All right, so once you have filled out all of those questions, like in the field here, you'll see that there's a little check mark up at the upper right. You would click that once you're done with all of the fields. If you've forgotten to include any of the required fields, the app will actually stop you from going to the next screen. So it's kind of a way to help make sure that you're filling out everything. So if it's not letting you through, just make sure you have all of those required fields filled out. Once you click the check mark, it takes you back to that main home screen like at the beginning. So we have our pictures, birds, all of those different fields. And now you'll see down here that there is a 1 next to project indicating that we have added it to one of our projects. And then to finalize the observation, you just click the green check mark, and that is it. You've made your first observation in our iNaturalist project. And I know that can seem like a lot when we go over those examples, but it really is a pretty straightforward process when you're out there. And once you've logged a couple of observations, almost everyone I've worked with has said, oh, that was pretty simple, and they're ready to go. So here is a map of our site in downtown St. Louis. For those of you who are returning, um, there are a couple of slight changes this year. One is that 909 Chestnut, we will not be monitoring around it this season. They actually have that entire block cordoned off as it looks like they're doing renovations on the building. We'll also be unable to do the south side of the AT&T data center here as they have that road closed currently. So in downtown St. Louis, it's going to be all of those same questions that we just went through for the Clayton project, but there's two additional fields. One of those is carcass information, and that is should be defaulted to no, and um, for our purposes, that's always going to be no. In the past, we've collected some of the carcasses for the collisions that we found for educational purposes, such as taxidermy, but we're not running any programs like that currently, so the answer to that should always be no. There is also the section of the building, which we'll go into here on the next slide. So on some of our larger buildings that receive a fair number of collisions in downtown Louis, we have an additional map for those buildings. And that helps us narrow down exactly where the collisions are occurring at those larger sites. And the idea is that in a situation where we're working with a property that, there's limited resources for treatment, we can help guide them to the particular areas of the building that are experiencing the most collisions and are the most problematic so that treatment could be focused there. So here's an example of one of the section maps for the Spire building in downtown St. Louis. So you can see here, it's basically a rough outline of the building, and we have these different subsections that are labeled with different headings. And so, for example, if you were out doing a survey and you found a bird right here where my indicator light is, in the section in um, the building section portion of the project, you would indicate Spire S5. And you would just do that for wherever you find the bird in the corresponding area of the building. Okay, so some frequently asked questions. How long does it take to survey? And the answer to that is it depends. And it depends on a few different things. It depends on factors like how fast you walk, uh, how many collisions there are in that particular day. When there's more collisions, it tends to take a little longer since there's more to log as far as observations. I would say the average time is probably around an hour and a half. What do we do with the birds that we find? So we dispose of the carcasses when we're able to. So whenever you're done with your pictures, we'll pick up the bird and dispose of it. There's a lot of trash cans in downtown St. Louis and downtown Clayton, so luckily you shouldn't have to go for an extended period, carrying around a bird. But we do that for a couple of reasons. Um, One is that it prevents the bird from being counted again and over again by subsequent surveys. We don't want to, overstate the number of collisions that we're seeing by making multiple entries on a bird. So that helps to prevent that. And then just generally, it's more sanitary. Bird carcasses can attract in scavengers and other, undesirable animals that we just don't really want around. So this helps keep things clean. Gloves. As far as wearing gloves, that's up to you. If you don't wear gloves, I would recommend, just following, basic, wildlife handling, sanitary, principles. Make sure that you're washing your hands. Make sure that, before you, have had a chance to wash your hands or sanitize, that, you're not touching your face and your eyes, things like that. Just good practicing good hygiene. We actually do have some nitrile gloves available for volunteers as well. So if you would like some of those, we can provide some for you, and we'll coordinate that with all the rest of the equipment. For those of you who have surveyed in the past, we are not doing any sort of paper forms this year. All of the data is being logged into our iNaturalist projects, and so you won't need to worry about anything as far as, physical forms. When it comes to the maps, I typically recommend it's not a bad idea to actually print out a copy of the maps, just in case you're in downtown St. Louis and you maybe are having, internet issues and you're not able to get in your email and get your maps. If you're on the tech-savvy side, you can download those map files on your phone, and then you won't need the internet, and you can just use those digital copies. But whatever works best for you. So there is a chance that during our collisions that you might encounter a bird that's stunned and still alive. Um, in those cases, if the bird is somewhere that it's in immediate danger, um, you can go ahead and try to move it to a safer location, like maybe some shrubs or just somewhere with some better cover. You can then at the end of your collision monitoring, a lot of times if I do that, I like to kind of just go back really quick and just see, were they able to, fly away or are they still there? Um, in the event that you find a bird that's, clearly injured and it needs help, there are places that we can contact, and we have a lot of great rehabilitation partners here in the St. Louis area that can help in a situation with when you find an injured bird. So you'll always want to be sure to call them beforehand just so that they're aware of the situation and they can give you some guidance and let you know if you need to bring the bird in for evaluation. The majority of the birds that we encounter are songbirds, and the rehabber for songbirds in our area is Wild Bird Rehabilitation up in Overland. If you happen to find an injured raptor like an owl or a hawk, that's very, 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 very infrequent. But in the event that you do, you can contact World Bird Sanctuary out in Valley Park. If you encounter an injured waterfowl like a duck, also a situation we don't encounter very often or if ever, we haven't in my time that I'm aware of. And but they can be taken to Wildlife Rescue Center down in Baldwin. Again, you just want to make sure to reach out to them first, just to let them know what's going on, and they can give you guidance from there on what to do. In the event that you do take a bird into one of our rehab partners, if you can just send me a quick email to let me know, I'd appreciate that. I like to try to keep tabs on them to see, what the outcome is, and tried to tell stories around that for, our work and then also the work that our rehabilitation partners do in helping to nurse these birds back to health. So how surveys work, what I'll be doing here towards the end of the week is I'll be sending out a sign-up calendar. It's a Google Sheet. What you'll just do is you'll fill in your name on the particular date that you'd like to survey. All surveys have a couple of slots listed for them. We like to have at least two people going out together. And that's, just for general safety. We've never had any problems in that regard, but it's also good to have, an extra set of eyes so that in case, one person accidentally misses something, there's a better chance that someone else might see it. There are instances where you might have more than two people. I'd recommend no more than two unless you're helping to, maybe bring an extra person out for their first survey and help train them. Which brings us to the next point. Ideally, everybody's first survey will be with a person who has already gone through the protocols and surveyed before. That way, in case you have any questions, you've got someone there with you to help you, go through your first observations. And what you'll do is, so once you've signed up for a slot and you see who your partner is, you'll coordinate with them on where and when you want to meet up. So your start time is typically for fall, I would say around September 1st, we're probably gonna start around 6:15 to 6:30 would be the recommended time. One thing to keep in mind is that at this time of year, dawn and sunrise is getting later in the morning. So when we start our surveys this year on September 1st, dawn is at 6:03 and sunrise is at 6:30. A month later in October, dawn is at 6:30 and sunrise is at 6:57. So as we get a little later into the season, you'll be able to start a little bit later as well because we don't want you necessarily going out in the dark when you can't see because, there's a high probability that you could miss something. So, be sure to, give yourself some adequate light. Um, as far as parking in downtown Clayton, there's a lot of metered parking all around, which is free before 8 a.m. There's also free parking on the street north of North Central, north of the library on North Central. In downtown St. Louis, parking is pretty much all metered, but again, that's free before 8 a.m. So both surveyors, when you're out with your partner, both surveyors are allowed to make posts in Dye Naturalist, but we want to make sure that we're only making one observation per bird. So, that's completely up to you and your partner how you coordinate that. If one of you wants to be the person that's doing, all of the logging and the observations, totally fine. If you want to, go back and forth, that's fine as well. We just want to make sure that we're only doing one observation in the project per collision. Um, if you encounter a stunned bird, we do want to include that in the project. But we don't obviously want to stress the birds, they're already having a tough situation. So just, from a respectable distance, take a couple of quick pictures and, we don't have to get all of those different detailed shots. Just take a few pictures and put in the notation something to the effect that, it was a stunned bird, because that'll help to cue me on why we don't have the full set of pictures. There's a good chance that while you're out there, people will ask you what you're doing. That could just be, random people in the public going on their way to work in the morning. In some instances, security at different properties might come out and ask what you're doing. Typically, we don't really have many problems. Can provide you with a name tag if you'd like. We'll coordinate that through the equipment requests. If you're a master naturalist and you want to wear your master naturalist name tag, that's fine as well. It's nicer than the one that I would be able to provide to you. Um, but typically, if someone comes up and asks what I'm doing, I say something like that, my name's Matt. I'm a volunteer with St. Louis Audubon Society, and we're out here doing collision monitoring and documenting where birds are colliding with buildings. A lot of people, you might get some follow-up questions, or someone might, tell you about a collision they had at their house. That happens a lot as well. When you tell people what you're doing, they tell you, how they relate to that. In the event that, you're at a building and, like the security guards had asked you to leave, or you're, just don't feel comfortable in a situation, it's not a problem. You can go ahead and leave. If you do have a situation, please let me know so that way I'm aware, and if I need to take any action, I can, as far as, talking to property managers and things of that nature. We want to be sure that we're surveying all of the buildings that we're targeting. Some days you'll only find, maybe a few birds. Sometimes you'll find none. So it does vary from day to day. In the event that you do a survey and you find no collisions, please send me an email and let me know that you didn't find any collisions that morning. Um, just because there were no collisions, that's still data that we want to capture, that, someone was out there, went through the survey protocol and didn't find anything. That in and of itself is also data. And finally, just as a kind of aside, MDC is using iNaturalist to track bat sightings across the state. And their goal is to document species that have been encountered and to get a better understanding of bat distribution throughout the state. And so if you're so inclined, um, we would, if you'd like to, take a picture to help that effort and make an iNaturalist observation, it'd be very appreciated. So what you would just do is add a new observation, like generally, like a general observation. There won't be any sort of project that you need to select or anything like that. Just the fact that it's identified as a bat in the state of Missouri, that will allow the team at MDC to see that observation, and then they can add it into their project. In my personal experience, we see more bats in the fall than the spring. A lot of times you see them on the mornings where it might have been, a situation where it was a warm day and it really the temperature really dipped off in the evening. So on those following mornings, you might see some, kind of sluggish and tired looking bats around. Um, if you are going to help take those pictures and help with that collection, please do not handle bats. Bats can be carriers of rabies and vectors for other illnesses. So, unless you have experience with bats and you're vaccinated against rabies, please just do not handle bats. And again, you're not required to do this. This isn't mandatory by any means, but it does help our friends at MDC um, to collect data since we're already out there doing our surveying. All right, so the next steps, what I'll be doing from here is I'll be sending out a Google form to collect just some information like we discussed earlier, like your iNaturalist information once you've created your account, your contact information, so that way we can help have the master list so you can coordinate with your survey partner and get in touch with each other. And I will also include our maps for the different sites, those section maps, and a copy of these slides. Um, there will also be a recording of this presentation posted to our YouTube page, which I will be sure to share the link to. The sign-up calendar is going to go out later this week. And this season, we're looking to survey starting at the beginning of September, and we'll probably go until around mid-October. Right now, I'm saying around the 19th. In the event that we see, like on Birdcast, that there's going to be some heavy migration nights after that, we might organize some impromptu surveys as well to try to see, what occurs on those nights with high migratory activity. All right, and with that, that brings me to the end of my presentation. Um, at this point, if there's any questions or comments, I'd like to, open up the floor and uh, work through those. If you typed something in the chat, I can't see that currently since I am sharing my screen. But if you want to, unmute yourself and ask any questions you might have, I'm happy to help. All right. Going once, going twice.
I have a question.
Yes, yes.
I just wanted to see, I'm with Missouri Master Naturalists, and I
Mhm.
didn't sign up with you or anything. The link for the Zoom was just on the calendar, so I just jumped on. But how do we get our contact info to you? Should we just email you, or is there an official sign up?
Yeah, so Zoom will keep a registry of everyone that's been on the call this
Oh,
evening for me, so it should log your information. Worst case scenario, if you're a master naturalist, I'll get in the log. If I, for some reason, don't have your contact information, I can get in the membership list and find that, and
okay.
get in touch with you.
Perfect.
Yes, I have a question too.
Yes.
The surveys, are we going to survey, it sounds like we're going to survey a number of buildings or all the buildings that are on the map. How does that work?
Yeah, so I can go back a few slides. So yeah, um, on this like downtown St. Louis map, you can see yes, there are multiple buildings that we survey on each survey. So here, what you want to do is look like at the buildings that have these blue outlines around them.
Mhm.
So in this instance, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 buildings that we're surveying in downtown St. Louis. Downtown Clayton is, I think, maybe one or two more buildings, but it's roughly the same.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. All right. Well, in the event that anybody has any questions or comments that come up after the presentation here, or if you just want to ask those privately, that's no problem. I'll go ahead and put up my contact information here and just leave that up so that anybody can take that down if you'd like. If you ever need to get in contact with me and you don't have my information readily available, um, all of my contact details are also available on the St. Louis Audubon Society website at the bottom of the page under employees. So I all of my details are there as well. Or you can look me up also through Great Rivers Master Naturalists if you're in that crew.
Matt, I do have a question.
Sure.
It's not about surveying exactly, but is anybody noticing or tabulating the number of buildings where they've actually made changes based on this data? And is that published somewhere? And, do we give a big shout out to those organizations for doing things right?
Yep, that's a really good question. So, my position was created about a year ago to manage and oversee this program, partially because in the past, this effort was completely volunteer driven. So in the past, there was a lot of data collection and getting that ground level of, what exactly is occurring, but there wasn't necessarily a lot of action happening around it. Um, Now in this role and position, I'm starting to engage more with property managers and stakeholders about, what we're seeing at their properties and taking that information and presenting it to wider audiences. So for example, I gave a presentation to the Building Owners and Managers Association of St. Louis this spring, which is effectively like a trade group for property owners and managers. That presentation has actually started some conversations with the property management team at Bank of America in downtown St. Louis. So we're starting to see, some movement around, though our data actually being, people seeing our data and wanting to take action. And so that's an effort that I'm continuing to work on. But yes, the answer is if we find someone or once we find a property manager that is going to start making renovations, it's definitely something that we would want to celebrate and share that news and help to, celebrate that, encourage others to, join the movement. And also, it's a great conversation piece on, well, why does that building have the dots on it? Um, Whenever people have that accessibility and they're able to see that, it really gets, I think, the public in general thinking more. But yeah, we're advocating now with that data to make changes, and we're starting, I would say, to see some exciting developments on that front.
Hey Matt, it's Frank Fisher.
Yeah.
I'm trying to see how prevalent is this Audubon doing this in other cities?
Yeah, so this is a definitely an effort that is international and it's growing. So there's a lot of collision monitoring happening in larger cities. Philadelphia has a really great program called BirdSafe Philly. There is collision monitoring work that goes on in Chicago, Toronto, Montreal. So it is a growing movement and there's more, I would say, more interest. I was actually just at a National Audubon conference recently, and I had the opportunity to talk with some different people about, our efforts here in St. Louis. And there was a lot of interest on, how could we start something like that in our city? So I think it's as more awareness is spread about the issue of collisions and really, the detrimental effect that it has on our birds, there's getting to be more movement around let's do something about this.
That's great to hear. Thanks so much for getting this started.
Yeah, certainly, certainly. All right. Well, if there's no further questions for the moment, I will go ahead and let you all go for the evening. Thank you once again for your time and listening to me. And if you ever have any questions, concerns, be it related to BirdSafe or other bird related subjects, feel free to reach out to me anytime, and I'm happy to help in whatever way I can.